welcome to Tap. I'm so happy that you are here, that you've tuned in, that you've tapped in. And I hope that you are doing very well and not so hot as I am at the moment. Some people are enjoying a good heat wave, right? And I don't really ride those heat waves. I resist them. It's not pretty, I'll tell you. So I live in an apartment, which I'm very happy about, which you will know if you've heard some other episodes, because I have been living in different places. But I live in a little apartment, and it's a central area, and there's a lot of noise. And it's fine because we have really good windows, so when we close the windows, there's no noise. So I'm happy about that, except during summertime, because I can't breathe inside of here. So it's a choice between having a lot of noise from the outside, from the road, from the kids, from, I don't know, always someone is working on some renovation project, it sounds. So either you have that very loud noise or you just have heat. So right now, so you're not disturbed, I've closed the windows and I might melt away. So it actually means that because we're going to spend some time together. If you've been with me before, you're in for a long one. That's how it is. It means that at some point I can predict right now that I am going to need a break. And that means that the next time that I sit here by the microphone, my voice is going to sound a little bit different, because I'm not very good at placing myself in the exact same position. But it's still me talking. So don't go into despair because of that. Okay, so we're going to talk about really fun topics, as is the tendency here. Just to remind us what we're doing here, actually. Let's do that. I am assuming what we can call a critical stance, like a critic, if you know, like critical thinking. So it's a critical stance about the dominant truth that we have. The mainstream, what is established, what we can call the mainstream discourse, because I really want to challenge the stigma associated with various sensitive themes, starting off with my own life examples, but we can surely expand it beyond that. But that's where we are right now. But just so you know that's why it's so dear to my heart. It is not just because I've been asking myself this question, because I know there is this reminiscence of the religion in me. Obviously, it might sound a little bit like I might be understating that, because surely there are a lot of threads from so many years of thinking in that way. But one of them is around confessions. So I've been thinking about, is that why I feel this urge to share these things? Because, I gotta examine myself. And let's not rule that out, but I also feel there's a mission here. And when you got a lot of Sagittarius, you work well with missions and getting your truth out there. And it is really a mission that we can actually talk about deep things that matters and that are not pretty. And it's still all this great. No one is secretly calling a doctor and getting you admitted to the psychiatric ward. It's like, can we just be humans? So that's a big part of why I am going through some of my sensitive life topics. So, and let's start with the continuation of last time. That is the family estrangement theme. And we are, as you've probably seen in the title of this program, we're going to talk about suicide and suicide ideation and suicide thoughts and all that self-sabotaging tendency. And what those two themes have in common, if you look at it this way, is that there is this broad social consensus, like I talked about just, this established truth, that this behavior, and I even want to say this choice the choices here are wrong and they elicit negative reactions from others. But we have to remember that those decisions are not made in a vacuum. So it's starting to talk about family estrangement, rounding that theme up, and I'm using quotation marks because I'm like, it's never done, it's never wrapped up, but just for now anyway. So if I were to not have estranged from my family, I would only have access to either manipulative, very formalized contact, like at a family event where there would be a lot of topic avoidance, I know that, and distorted truth to the point of where I would feel a sense of betrayal, really. So in a way, what am I estranging from, right? Not my definition of a support system anyway, which is what I think a family is. And now I have this thought I want to share with you, but I also want to say that I haven't tested it on anyone before you. Okay? So I haven't shared this thought with anyone. And so it's risky business, but that's especially how I live my life verbally, because it's just the way it comes out. What if it was normal for a family, for all the family members, right, to part ways? I'm not exactly sure about the age here. We're not in details. It's just a thought experiment. So, okay, all the family members, whenever they can, they part ways, they split up, and they go for their individual growth. They go self-express on their own. And then if the parents were inspiring, if the brothers were kind and empathetic, there can be sisters too. I'm just very much up in my own story here. If the family were, someone that you feel like hanging out with, then of course, then you choose to have a close relationship to them. If they live unconsciously in a narrow trauma response, then you would just do the normal thing of getting close friends instead of relying on biological connections. You know, because I have the thought, because today it's expected that you, no matter what it is your family are, like no matter whatever different worlds you live in, you still have to stand your family at family gatherings, and you're still considered to be a part of them, whatever you were born into. And I think it's a good suggestion. What do you think? I think it's a good suggestion that it should be opposite. And I'm not ignoring that people get old and we need to care for old people I was going to say in our families, but that's the thing. I don't think it has to be the family that you care for. Does it have to be the biological family? I see no reason why, none whatsoever. I think it should be normal to choose your family. Isn't that the greatest validation and reassurance you can get, that someone chooses you because they like you and not just because they have applied to do it, that they're obligated to do it. So it's a sort of thing with a membership, right? Should you be born with this membership, or should you be able to choose it, something that you add to your life? And that's where this normalization plays a heavy role, I think, because I mean, you might say that it's already like that. I don't know, I'm just trying to come up with what will people say about this idea. But some might say that you can already just do that. Just like leave your family if you want to, choose them if you want to, right? I hope you can see it. Like I can really see it. Like if it's just normal, like you grow up at some point, whatever age, you leave home and you don't really have the contact with your family, unless it's like, whoa, we are like connecting, we're like becoming friends here. Or maybe not friends, but friendly anyway. And And then you don't have to do all of that where your stomach hurts and you get nervous and you don't sleep before you have to go see your family, which I know I'm definitely not the only one for those sort of symptoms. But anyway, if someone were to say that you can already do that, yeah, I think people don't realize how big of a social stigma it actually gives to leave your family. And so let's say, apart from the social stigma and also a couple of hours sitting alone on Christmas Eve or whatever significant date, then why is leaving your biological family such a big issue? There's some social stigma. You're gonna sit alone a few times. Well, I'll say it is a big thing, as it is now. Now we've left my thought experiment, okay? We've moved out, unfortunately, into the real world. And I'll say it's the connective element of what we consider families to be. The notion of family is tied to the sense of who we are in the world. Like I mentioned last time with your last name, right? In the name. And it's also, and regardless of that, because there's all of these old things, but I'm actually talking about also just now in current time, 23. The family is understood to be the most basic social institution whose ties remain primary over a life course. So it's that basic social institution. And there's really no way you can critique this, because there's part of this you can't really critique. It's like you gotta have someone that you grow up with, right? So, but there's more than the attachment part of it. There's also the social standing, and that is certainly a thing that I can critique and I want to critique. Having a family, or even a good family, influences your social standing. So you become better or worse in regards to your family, whatever they did. It's a direct influence on you. And then there's also this about placing reliance on friendships rather than biological family. I definitely did place greater reliance on friendships. I'm not sure when that started, but for a long time. It has been hard for the friendships that I was seeking a family-like commitment. When you're younger, it's a lot. And then, because I'm answering this guy's question who's saying, oh, you can just, why is it such a big deal to leave your family? And then I'm answering him right now, right? So I'm saying that also leaving family statistically increases health problems. Now, up to this episode, I've been reading different books, and it's one of the big ones. And I don't know, is it greater than other traumas? I guess the idea is that you don't have that social support, and that is not good for your health. And in this book that I'm gonna talk more about, she also mentions that there's no support in crisis. But I mean, in my case, the family was already disengaged, so there would have been no help anyways, whether I left or I didn't. So, but it is certainly a big deal, just what I've said now, like that you are more at risk with your health, that your social standing is highly influenced. I mean, can you imagine the scenes that I've been in, and maybe you have too if you've parted from your family, that where people just ask so normal questions like, oh, so what you're up to? What are you up to this holiday? Are you going to be with your family? And hey, what are you going to do on Christmas Eve? And just all these really normal hairdresser questions. That's one part of it. It's in a way it's the easy part of it, because it's just the feeling of, I don't know what comes up, shame or embarrassment, or I don't really want to talk about it kind of feeling. In a way that's the easy thing, because the hard thing about social standing is that you are more at risk with not being able to survive, actually, because I mean, I'm sure you can survive. Okay, I'm just saying that it may be harder to make it out in the world if, first of all, you're on your own, and second, also if it influences how people view you, that you have left your family. We're back to the social stigma. So, but I really believe and experience now that a substitute family, or a family of choice, can compensate for the absence of a biological family. And I will say that I still build my family as it is now. It takes a lot of trust and a lot of time to earn that trust. And maybe that's why, actually, that the other system, the biological system, is the established one, because it's so much easier and just it demands less from you, really. But I'm happy to do what it takes, and I think it's in modern time, this is a sort of thing we should really open up to, that effort to find and create and maintain a family of choice, because I have found, and the reason I'm happy to do this is that I really have found some really good people that I can feel safe with in a completely new way, and who inspires me. And when I say that, it inspires me. So what does that mean? What does it mean, safety? I just want to share an anecdote. Because also prior to breaking away from church, I was in a way also building family, because I didn't have that family, even though I had the religion. So it was just in the church, I've been in different churches because I've moved around, that I was building family. And when we just had our first son, we moved out of the city where we lived in, and also changed to church. We moved because of my sort of infidelity. At least it was enough of an affair to get me kicked out of church. So we moved pretty far away, and we started in a new, sweet, and I felt loving at the time. I felt a loving congregation, and I quickly became friends with a couple. We became friends with a couple. I'm not sure about friends anymore. I should reserve that word, really, but that's how acquaintances, probably. But that's, we felt we were friends. And so we hung out with this really cool young couple around our age, and they were very inspiring in what they did for a living, their careers, their volunteer work at church, also their looks. Yeah, I said looks. I mean, they just looked pretty, and they were like picture perfect to me. But at that time, I was really struggling. Oh my God, I was struggling. So I've started to feel the weight of depression. I think it was just before my second pregnancy. And I spoke to the husband in this couple, just call them husband and wife. And I told the husband about it one time. He was picking me up, and we were going to whatever thing with the church. And because he was always so charismatic and asked, "How are you?" And so I would reply. I remember it was because he was literally asking, generally asking, "How are you?" And I said, "I'm depressed. I don't feel good. I'm not sure what to do about it." And he said, I remember this. It's like I wrote it into my memory, because this is 14 years ago, okay? Maybe 15 years ago. It's a long time ago. But I remember his answer. I remember where we were. He said, "Oh, you shouldn't be depressed." And at first I tried to be like him and say that to myself. Okay, just don't do it. Just shove it away. Don't be depressed. Just don't. But when I did that, I also felt the protest. Felt, okay, are we even friends when there's no empathy here? And I don't remember telling the wife about this exactly, but I remember telling the wife, because right now we're talking about what is inspiring people, what does it mean to be real friends, and also what in my world is gonna be a sort of a family, right? And so I remember one time telling the wife, crying, why we had moved. I carried a lot of guilt, a lot of guilt at that time. Even though that I had Jesus to forgive it all the time, it just kept, I kept clinging on to it. So I was really broken and told her, this happened, I did it, all of that. And even before I finished the story, which was a long story to her defense, she interrupted me. And she said, you don't have to tell me this. And of course I was quick to say, but I want to. But she continued, because I remember she had a point. And I remember that some of my words were held back while she was saying this point. That I, of course, don't remember exactly what it was about. But it was about that some things are private and, And when she said that, in a way I felt, okay, so maybe she just accepts me no matter what. I kind of like that part about it. And then I also, because I'm always examining myself, I'm always like, where does this fit in all of the system that's me, right? So I was like, this is good for this part of me, this tendency that I have. I mentioned it earlier, that to seek forgiveness everywhere. It's another way of saying confession, right? Seeking forgiveness everywhere. That was really such a tendency. I can still fall into that trap if I'm not aware. But so I felt, okay, she has a point. Yeah, granted. But something was a little bit off, right? Because I was somehow shut down. Like I tried to share something important, because I think you do that in a friendship. I mean, I wanted to share this. I was guilt-ridden, so maybe it felt like I was unloading on her, and maybe I should have taken it elsewhere. I definitely wish I had gone to therapy, but I did not. So I actually understand her with this, because just unloading on people is not going to do anyone any good. But still, in this friendship, we should share vulnerable parts. So, yeah, it's just, I came to think about that, because they were really inspiring people. Like, I will admire them anytime from the outside, but at a great distance. Because once we get closer, and the inspiration is not really there for me. Maybe it is in terms of some kind of logic, some kind of standard that I've learned from the outside, that is important, but not around how do these people make me feel about myself. And I know that's my responsibility to take whatever message that I want from, but still, when we talk about a close relationship, when we talk about dear friends, family, support system, that was not it. So just a little point about what does it mean when someone is inspiring. I think it has a lot to do. I think you can get a clear message from how do I feel when I'm around them. Okay, so I'm starting to really draw on the book that I was talking about last time, and I also said last time that I think I read 33% of it for the last chapter. I have it on ebook, so you can see how many percent you have left. I kind of like that. So now I have finished it 100%. So I'm drawing upon that. It's called Family Estrangement, a Matter of Perspective. And I said last time that I wasn't sure if the author, if she had an underlying moral like the rest of them, which would be maybe revealed in the end that, it is the best if you just could stick with your biological family. But now I've finished the book, so I want to clarify that. I want to rectify that my concerns of that moral undertone say more about me and what I come from than this book and author. So I can just quote, just to get that straight, at page 151, she has this wonderful quote saying, "The ideas that blood is thicker than water, and that Home is where the heart is. Place undue pressure on families to stay together, regardless of the hurt and betrayals they must endure. How about that? So I feel she is successful in finding perspectives, which is part of her title. So I just wanted to get her off my moral hook, because she actually does offer valid reasons to both estrange and also maintain that estrangement further in the book. So maybe I should read a little bit more. This is page 159. She says, clients would benefit from practitioner who normalize. Can you hear how happy I am already? I'm just going to say it again. I'm just really happy about this. Okay. Clients would benefit from practitioners, like just anyone who works in the health sector, I think she means, who would normalize the estrangement experience, proactively seek and clarify the client's purpose early in the session, clarify the limits and boundaries of intervention, explain the ambiguous laws, and realistically the possible benefits that may accrue from a future exploration of the estrangement and its effects, if this is something the client wishes to pursue sometime down the track. See, that would have been helpful if only I've met practitioners like that, someone who did not have that. I could really feel this heavy, even sticky moral around you need to be with your biological family, and if you don't, then it's like the worst case scenario. And I don't like that sound either. I don't want to live the worst case scenario, so please give me options. But you know what? We make our own options. Okay, so last time we also talked a little bit about disenfranchised loss of grief, and I think I talked about it as when I was a child and my brother estranged me, but also in more recent years, it's come up for me in at least two ways. Which one of them I think we should talk about another time. This is when I instigated the loss of a child. You know, the instigation part is an important one because it's a choice. So it's easier to blame someone for something that they choose than some accident from the outside. I'll talk about that another time. But and the other one is how I can grieve losing a family when. I mean, it seems hard really for people not to blame me again because it's my choice. And in terms of my family, it's around, you're not really trying hard enough, are you? Why would you not continue to pursue this? And it's like just the fact that my family exists, that some of them at least are alive, is somehow enough to minimize my pain, which for me caused the need to cut the ties in the first place. Now, my parents, let's say, I don't know, because we've never really, it's never really gotten to that place where you can present all the facts, right? But let's say we did that, and then they said, because I have an idea that they might say, we didn't mean to hurt and manipulate you. And if that's the thing, that they would say that, then that seems enough to alleviate then responsibility for the feelings that I have. And that's again my critique, that it's actually not about intentionality. I know it can sound that way. Oh, they didn't mean to, right? Right. Well, that's not the turning point for me. It's not the intentionality. It's also about trust. Does the parent, the family member have the capacity to implement actions to ensure the intentions are met? Right? So you can be filled with intentions, but can they be met? And is there a commitment to act differently? Like I mentioned with things that came up with my father that would scream at me when I was pregnant as an adult, like he did when I was a child. It's like, you're kind of missing the point here. You can't just say you're sorry and you don't mean to hurt me and then just gonna be your worst self continuously. It doesn't make any sense to me. And I remember shortly after I had given my son up for adoption, my mother insisted to meet up. It wasn't about that. That's a whole nother story. With the adoption, there's many stories in that one story. So, but shortly after, she insisted to meet up, and she never does that because there was this disengagement. There was a split, right? We had cut the ties in one sense or another, even though she sometimes helped with my kids. But at this point, I don't know how much you remember of my story, but I don't want to repeat it either if you feel like, oh, I really know that. But so just, no, I don't want to do that. But at this point, I live far away from her, and we don't have contact really. And she then, I don't think she calls, because she never calls. So she must have just texted and mailed and like really insisting we need to meet up. So she convinced me that it was urgent. We met up, and I chose the place, a crowded juice place with loud noise for, well, obvious reasons. Didn't want it to be that close. But because we're alone, just the things that I have to hear, I didn't want to do that. So I felt this is the safest way that I can meet her. And this is where she tells me that my father is leaving her after 30 years of marriage. And I have so many feelings around this, in this situation. She's crying and totally devastated, broken. And I'm trying to hide that I'm somehow happy because they were awful for each other. And I thought it would never happen because she would talk to me as a child about leaving him and then never doing it, not feeling good enough, not feeling she could get on without him. And so to me, it was like a miracle that this had happened. But here we are, and my mother really needs support, and I have to have sympathy for her, and I do have that, and I did have that when we were there. She tried to build a different family from the one that she came from, which was filled with violence, with poverty too, not to mention shame that she grew up in. I think a lot of shame also because of being poor. But so yeah, I have that like regard for my mother. Yeah, she really tried to create a different life, right? But the thing is, it didn't really work out wonderfully. There's still so many social problems, so many traumas that are present, and I'm not blaming here, but the thing is, see this situation, right? My mother has wanted to meet up. We sit there at a juice bar. She's telling me this thing. She's completely broken. She needs my help. And where am I? Well, I just gave away my baby. I'm trying not to kill myself when I have anxiety attacks, and I feel the very real desperation of not being able at this point to provide for my 2 kids. We live at a temporary room, and I basically it's in that era that I start to sell my body to have money enough. And I don't want to ask my ex-husband again. I probably did, but I don't really like it because, first of all, he's never got enough money for himself, and I don't want to put a strain on that relationship, that very fragile but so central to the kids' relationship. So I'm in all of these basic needs, a struggle to just meet the needs of me, the needs of my children. I'm not anywhere near where I can also help my mother, who is going to be homeless now because she was supported by my father. Very low income, but they lived on that. And I'm actually also angry with her, I guess. I'm not sure at that point. Now I'm not directing it towards them, but I can contact that anger that that I don't have any family support in the shit that I'm dealing with. So this is really relating back, because it's not a very present feeling right now for me. But at that time, which is 11 years ago or something, I didn't have the family support in giving away a child, in trying to find a place to live, and trying to find ways to survive. And you can discuss that, right? How much do your parents really owe you? And I know some people will say none. Nothing. They gave you life. Go figure it out. Sure, but I'm just saying I don't exactly have the resources to then also help my mother, who's, in this victimized identity, and is clearly also in a very exposed situation. At that moment, I paid the sandwich and the juice, and then nothing else. She did invite to come and help clean the apartment out and help with a bunch of things. But I was actually under too much pressure, and also from my two small kids who needed me and who were also reacting to their little brother not being there. So there was a bunch of things going on. And it's just an example of all good intentions. Like, I can understand objectively where she comes from. I can take that bird eye view, and she's doing life to the best of her abilities, but the capacity is not there to be anything now. And I truly wish that I could have helped her in that situation, for sure. But I was dealing with just breathing in my own body. And as I share it now, I'm relating to it from a new place. But I have to be conscious to do that. Because this is the sort of thing that I've been carrying a lot of guilt around. And that has been why I have asked so many people about, is it okay that I just don't ever contact my family ever again? Is it okay that I don't help out? Is it okay? Because they, or at least she, would need a lot of help. Still does need a lot of help. She's sick now. And so it feels counterintuitive in a way to not help. But then, I'm also the child, and I'm also dealing with a bunch of things. And it's not just a bunch of things, it's like survival things that have real consequences. So I do think that it was the best thing to separate in that very also ultimate way. Okay, we are progressing into the new theme here around suicide. But I want to just state the importance of opening to a family of choice if you are in this situation. Not that I want to give anyone advice on it, but I guess you're here just maybe to get some inspiration. So, I feel very stable at the moment with relationships. I'm very, very grateful for that. Just a few years ago, it was not like this. I had two primary friends. I think this is 2 years ago. And they, during the summer, independently of each other, withdrew from me. One had lost her son, big one. The son had died. And the other friend had a real depression, I think it was, like some kind of mental thing going on, and she didn't want contact in that period. That's like her way of handling it. She just needed to be alone. And that's what I mean about that there can be put some strain on established friendship, because now in crisis, who do you need to be with, right? So these were two close friends who were both in crisis, and they withdrew from me for more than half a year, like a long time. But it was just during the same summer. But who would they need to be with? Well, their family. So that's the thing when you don't have a family and you choose your friends as a family, but they have families. So they have someone somewhat closer for some other purposes. I'm not sure, but in that. So I was like, but what about my needs? I mean, I could understand them, but it was really tough. And I was grieving the loss of that contact. And then I felt, okay, I need to start expanding my circle of friends. It seemed like the natural thing to do. So the both of the girlfriends, they've come back now. They came back after I don't know how many months, but maybe 8 or something. And it's all good in that sense that they did what they needed. I'm going to respect that. But just for me personally, I realized that I needed to let more people in because I can't just be alone for so long. There's no one close to me because they, are dealing with stuff. I need someone where when you're dealing with stuff, you actually go to each other, right? I need that crew of conscious people around for support, both ways, of course. So I am expanding also currently. And just yesterday, I was with a couple that I met on a retreat, and I'm completely in love with both of them. Talk about inspiring. Like their souls inspire me. Truly, truly, truly. And I was at their home, and when I came back, they live an hour away, I texted them, and there was no reply. I thought, okay, it's just late. And then this morning, I was like, okay, no reply. And this is when I say I always examine myself. This is it. This is everyday happenings, thoughts, feelings, patterns. That is for me the work and the self-examination, exactly in those vulnerable situations. And maybe you're not sure that it is a vulnerable situation until you realize the pattern, which is there to protect something. So I realized, okay, this is a pattern of getting anxious now, and it's around if they don't respond, then maybe they don't like me, then maybe I'm gonna lose attachment, which you don't, because it's a childhood thing, but it's just taken in to this context when you're dealing with trauma. So just being aware of that pattern, I was like, okay, leaving it, I'm sending them so much love, and let's see what happens. And I let that go. Moved on with my day. And then during the afternoon, I'm talking to you really late at night, by the way, if you wonder how long was that day. This is really late at night because it took a while to finish the books. So anyway, so they sent me a text, and they said that they loved hanging out with me and that we should meet up again soon. And when I read that, I just burst into tears. I was really connecting to that place in me that still asks, why would anyone want to be with me? And I went through, I was like, I let my mind do this. I could have stopped it. I kind of indulged in it. I was okay, I didn't even have my hair down. Sometimes people like that, my big curls. If my hair is washed anyway, it can actually look pretty good if someone, anyway, there's some hair, and it wasn't even down. And the glasses was actually because I couldn't find my pretty glasses. And I just went through the whole thing. Also, I have a lot of confidence in astrology, which is also a thing to examine for me, because that's not a place I want to find my worth either. But I have been doing that. It has been like a way to get into contact with people. Oh, then they care about their chart, and then I get to talk about the thing that I really love, rather than maybe the small talk that was killing me anyway. So, but there is that confusion. Maybe then that's all that was to me was reading that chart. So, but we did that because I don't think I can be anywhere without talking astrology. So there was some of that, but the things that I said were not correct. I mean, because the questions that I got was like, so look at this chart that I've never seen before, don't know the person. And the question was, does this person take a lot of notes when studying? And I was like, exciting. So that's the part of astrology that's really not serious, but you can play around with it just to see, right? So I'm always up for that. I think it's fun, but it doesn't have anything to do with what I'm offering in my practice, just to be clear. But so every question that I got like that, I was wrong about it. And the reason, obviously, if you know astrology, is that, okay, you can have Mercury in Capricorn, and then you can have, say, the moon in the 12th house. And so which one is it? Of course, Mercury is most important in terms of studying, but let's say they're in a sharp aspect to each other, and it's like you just have both. You have both the letting go, and you also have the achievement. So I was wrong about everything, and I didn't really let it bother me because I know this explanation. I know it depends on the whole other system of you. How do you employ all of that you are, right? So I wasn't bothered by it, but it was just when I burst into tears and I felt that sentence, why would they want to hang out with me? I was a little sensitive, okay? And I went through those things. I was like, so it wasn't because of my looks, because I didn't do anything about that. It wasn't because the astrology, because I got everything wrong. So why do they want to be with me? And that was such an interesting thing, a deep question to ask myself, and to get in contact with my insecurities. And because I know that deep down there is something here, and I'm taking my life as a discovery process. Ever since I came into therapy, it's just been so exciting. When there is something like this, it's not taking me down anymore. It's like I'm taking it up. So it's not taking me down, I'm taking it up. I'm excited about it, that I just made that up. But I'm taking it up, and I'm looking at it, and I'm like, this is the discovery. Let's see. Because I also know that a big part of I'm having a hard time, I have had a hard time anyway, manifesting, is because there is that deep down feeling of something. And it's been different things manifesting. When I say that, it's so, for example, right now here in Denmark, I'm inviting people to attend yoga with me, and it's really uphill. And same with other offerings, but it really comes to the test with the insecurities when you want other people to be with you, and if you don't, if there's something inside of me that still thinks I'm actually not worthy to be with, or I have to do something, I have to look like something, I have to actively give in order for someone to want to hang out with me. If I have that, then that is a self-worth issue deep down, right? So I think it's important to do that, and that's why I share openly about my own process too, because I wouldn't want to pretend anything else. So, but it is, yeah. And ultimately, it is not to replicate the family patterns that I come from. That's why I keep taking things up. It's like, okay, I don't, like, of course it has been replicated, but let's just stop. Right? Okay, let's go to the topic of suicide ideation. I hope it's okay that I'm clapping. It's not too loud in your ears. You're getting a shock every time. It's just me being excited, then I clap my hands. Okay. Suicide ideation. Okay. I have dealt with suicide ideation and suicide attempts for many years, until a few years ago, actually. I think 3 years ago, where that gravitational pull, I want to call it, like that gravitational pull was finally healed for good. It's like that inside of me, that place that I used to go to, that place of suicide. I mean, it doesn't even have to be a downward spiral. It would just be like a quick elevator into that place of wanting to commit suicide. It doesn't exist anymore inside of me. And if you want to hear about it, I will tell you about when I had it healed, what happened. I want to have at least 3 listeners to text me. I know it's a lot, but otherwise I'm not going to do it. I still have this feeling that people just fall asleep to these podcasts. So I may never share that story, but it did happen, the healing. but it's still for me such an important thing to talk about, and it has been for many years before it was healed. I still felt we need to talk about this. I don't care if it's exposing this. It's like super important, and it's so lonely when you can't speak openly about it. So let's dig in and hope that no one censors this because of the theme. Because of course I recommend that you and I stay alive as long as we can. Okay? So, the suicide impulse, for me it has had ebbs and flows, at least since I was 13 years old, maybe younger. I started my first suicide attempt career. We can make fun of this a little bit too, because it's so sad, isn't it? It's so sad in a way. But so I started the first suicide attempt. I overdosed with painkillers. I mean, I was in my childhood home, took them in the cupboard. I seriously thought that I would never wake up again. And to my disappointment, not only did I wake up again, but no one noticed the missing pills or the fact that I was knocked out by them for some hours. I don't know how many hours, but it was in the afternoon. I wasn't supposed to sleep. Yeah, so that was a heavy one. I had taken all of these pills. I thought I was going to die. I was 13 years old. No one had a clue about it. In a way, I was satisfied with the fact that no one knew, because then I didn't have to. I was really scared that my parents would find out and be so angry with me. So they never knew, because they didn't see it. So the next time I attempted was by walking outside on the street, trying to get a car to hit me. And no one did. They all stopped. And then there was a new girl at school. I'm 14 at this point, and she's the only person that I speak to about this. And she tells me to do what I want. I grew up in a religious setting, in a religious school, right? And she was religious somewhat, but not like fundamentalist like the rest of us. So she would say this, that's her mantra: do what you feel like. And if you feel like killing yourself, I remember she said that, if you feel like killing yourself, I think you should do it. And at the time, I loved her for it. And now I'm like, that's a little scary to say that. So yeah, I made another attempt with pills, and then it didn't happen. And then a couple of years went. I was at boarding school when I tried again, not the first year but the second year. So boarding school is when you don't live at home, and I was really determined to kill myself that time. Actually, before that, I was cutting my wrist, just like a normal thing for me. I was cutting, but I knew that it would take more from me to get rid of myself. I'm like, this is so tragic that I can't. I laugh about it because it's really tragic, right? If I'm to feel into it, this is so tragic. It's so sad. There's a lot of grief also today where I'm like, I really have to grieve that little girl who thought she was no good, and that the best thing to do was to get rid of herself. That is an extreme thing. So, but anyway, at this boarding school, one day I had told my boyfriend, because I had got that one, things were actually going good. That it wasn't one total depressed stream or something. It was in periods where this thing came up. And I had told my boyfriend, I'm going to do it tonight. So just this one day, I'm just ready for it. This is it. I'm not going to just talk about it anymore. I'm just going to do it. And of course, he was a mess, and he told the teachers, which I told him not to do. And I felt so betrayed. But of course, he did. And this teacher came. I don't remember his words, but I just remember the feeling of sitting there, being interrogated. Just me and this old male teacher who kept asking and who kept quoting the Bible and kept saying, I shouldn't kill myself, I shouldn't kill myself. And I kept resisting. I said, but this is my plan. I am going to do it. And then when it was really late, everyone had gone to sleep. He then said, okay, but if you're still saying you're going to do it, I'll take you to the mental institution. And I said, well, then that's it, because I'm going to do it. And he drove me to the mental institution, and they told me to call my parents. I was 17 at this point, and my father picked up the phone. This is the next day. I didn't call during the night. It was the next day. And he said, hello. And crying, I said, I'm at the psychiatric hospital. And my father's words that I will never forget was, what have you done now? In somewhat that tone, like, what have you done now? Emphasis on now. Yeah, I'm like, it's an art to try and remember these traumatic happenings, right? It's actually not, because it's quite automatic to remember the trauma. What the real art would be was to remember some of the good stuff. But anyway, so I tried to explain to him what has happened, and he just became angry, and that has been really hard for me to look at. I think when we talk about family estrangement, that really happened after that, because that made me realize that the picture that I kept artificially alive inside of me about a father who just, I think it's just because he's not really present. Maybe he's just like this mysterious guy, and yeah, he gets angry sometimes, but it's okay. Like, I had all of these excuses for him. That really just burst there. It just broke down right there. Because, like, when do you need a parent more than when you are committed to the hospital because you don't want to live? It's like, oh, and then you become angry at me, right? But at the time, a big part of me thought he was right. You know, it was me again making troubles. It was me and all my emotions that no one else shared making trouble. Okay, but I'm actually just right now in the middle of running through my suicide attempts, just so that we have that overview. I think I had 2 more attempts. I also had something not exactly trying to kill myself. It's a little weird thing, but I feel that it's in the same kind of dark place in a way. It was where I would really check out, and I would go to the hospital. I just remember this has happened a few times. One of them when I was out traveling. I went to the hospital, and people would tell me to open my eyes, and I would really keep on just not opening my eyes, really trying hard not to open my eyes, and I would say I can't open them, but I knew that I could. Yeah, it's a little weird, but it was something somehow connected to this suicide, suicidality of me, of my patterns. Anyway, I don't want to put it together with who I actually am, but with a pattern. Yeah, so the last suicide attempt was a week before my wedding. I was taken to the hospital that time because I had really overdosed. I had taken a few bottles of something really, really strong, and they gave me something in my veins. I'm still not sure what it was, but it made me throw up. And I was in the hallway. So I was not inside a room because they had no more rooms. It was so crowded. And it was so unpleasant, not a healing environment. The nurses had reduced level of sympathy and readiness to help. So this is again a quote from a book we're going to come to in a little bit. They definitely had reduced level of sympathy and readiness to help, which is in that book, which it says it's true towards suicide attempters, particularly those of adolescent variety, as there can be all these ideas that the young person is trying to manipulate someone. And I remember one of my girlfriends, I did it actually, I lived with a girlfriend at the time. I was 20 years old, I lived with a girlfriend, and she told them that I was getting married in 1 week. So the nurse said to me, so just don't get married, she said to me, really harsh. It was very, as I remember it, there was no care. And I usually do remember care. But I remember it was a harsh treatment. And when she said, just don't get married, I was like, what do you mean? It, for me inside, it was not connecting. And it's really fun to think about that I couldn't, at that time, I just couldn't connect the dots. I said, marriage, that's great. I want to marry him. But then also I want to die right now. That's a thing that went on there. So yeah, it's complicated. Of course, being a child and a young woman without support, and complicated by the religion too. But that was the last time, because then I had kids the next year, and I still had serious suicidal thinking, but I could never go through with the plan. I did have the plans in my head, so it's not like that I've protected my kids, unfortunately, from this, because I think having a mother who can even go that dark is really traumatic. So I'm not saying that that it has been without consequences, but at least I was not able at any point to do it after I had kids, because if I would really realize it, like plan it, like, okay, now I'm going to do it, and it would be like, my babies, I can't do that. So it has been like this, that's just a guarantee that that's never happening again because of them. And then also some years ago, the whole thing got healed. I'm really grateful for that. But so yeah, let's dive a little bit more into it, because like I said, it was complicated by my religion. The fact that the religions say that it's a sin to commit suicide, right? And then you have this hope. Well, at least I did. Where I was like, okay, if I commit suicide and I go to heaven, then God, of course, will forgive me for having committed suicide, right? That's my hope. And also there's just a notion that committing suicide is selfish, because you have an obligation to others. You know how you say often, just think about the people who find you, right? Think about the people you leave. So it's complicated like that. And yet on the other side, I was really romanticizing death as this ultimate peace, this way to complete forgiveness and just no more pressure, all of that relief. And I've always had these philosophical thoughts. I've not always examined myself the way that I do now therapeutically, but I have examined myself through whatever philosophical system was in my head. And most of my life it has been the religion, right? But at that time, I've had not necessarily smart thoughts, but reflective thoughts. And when I was around 19 when I heard this. I heard, and I know because it was in a school, so I know how old I was. I heard about the death drive, Freud's concept that I, of course, did not understand all of that, because it's like part of a big theory. But just this concept of a death drive that we all have as an instinct. As an instinct means that we respond to it no matter the consequences. And I was so intrigued, because I felt finally this could be a natural thing inside of me, and maybe my death drive is just more developed than other people's or something. A death drive, it seems so good. Because, death is a necessary outcome of life, right? But the part around a death drive, that concept is you're striving towards death. That made sense, that there was a strive towards, an active strive toward death. So, but that's one thing to have, a thing, good, confirmation, but what should I do with it? I found it really hard to temper my death wish with anything else than whatever thing I was doing at the time studying, because everything I believed in kind of pointed to death as the best thing ever. Heaven, right? Heaven, you have to die to go there. Also, my father that never wanted me, yeah. So and also to be free from all the devastation I felt inside, to put it like that. I had really powerful feelings, and to a large extent, religion was covering for that. All the volunteer work that I did, I was one big volunteer work. I did a lot of volunteer work. So all of that was covering for a lot of pain on the inside. And today, I understand the suicide attempts, the ideation, and maybe if you're not familiar with the word ideation, I should just say that it is this romanticizing. It's like, when I die, it's gonna be so great. Like you can almost get that, that death orgasm, right? From thinking about it. That's another point, actually. And we're gonna talk about Mars in Pisces, and Pisces is also related to addiction, and I think you can be really addicted to a way of thinking. And for the many last years, I have been saying that to people when I've talked about my suicide ideation, thoughts. I've also said that I had this feeling that I might just at this point be addicted. But the suicide attempts, the suicide ideation, rumination, you can call it also, I see that as due to this fundamental flaw I believed myself to be, right? The fundamental flaw coming from the environment when I was small, coming from the religion telling me I'm sinful, but that was the foundation of me. Then, of course, I would become self-destructive, because that self-destruction would mirror the rejection I was met with, at least emotionally as a child. I mean, they didn't kill me, but emotionally they did reject me. And suicide is the ultimate self-rejection, as you see. It's a self-annihilation. And I also thought about how a shut down nervous system, and I know there are more correct ways of saying that. We go into the nervous system some other day when I feel talking about technical stuff. But right now in my mind, I'm just thinking about the nervous system that, have these different states to it. And if it's shut down, I mean, it's almost like your body, your system is not living anyway. So death is a match to what's in your body. Do you see what I mean? It's quite powerful to me, that thought, but maybe I need to expand on it when I go through the nervous system one day. But it's like an inner energy of already having given up, and then that energy is not a match for life anymore. It's a match for death. And so in a way, the truth is what I felt. I need to die. That was the truth, because that is what matched to my current state. It's just a thought. Like I said, I have many interpretation of things, especially inside of myself. So I think it's fun to play with, to understand from different perspectives. But now let's visit suicide from a more theoretical point of view. And I want to say my own theory is, of course, also related to prior lives, always, because that's really an imaginative challenge. It's fun to think about it like that, and it makes sense. It's not just fun, it makes a lot of sense. It gives meaning to what they experience. So when I read the following, try to listen to at least the first part of it in the lens of, this is how society, the norms that I, and maybe you, probably you too, have come from. And then if we've come from that, then no wonder there's a strong impulse carried into this life around suicide. But it's just an idea. Just when I read it, maybe think, okay, if society was like that, you grew up in that, then you internalized a tendency to this, and now you're in this life and your soul remembers it. That's like the logic of prior lives, soul memory. The book is called Adolescent Suicidal Behavior, written by David K. Curran in 1987, 1 year after I was born, Pluto in Scorpio. Okay. He says here, our Western culture, developed from Judeo-Christian and Greco-Roman values and traditions, has always harbored a deeply ambivalent attitude toward suicide and attempted suicide. Early societies sometimes forced certain members into committing suicide for ritual purposes. Modern Judaism, while officially regarding suicide as a sin, rests upon a long tradition of honoring heroic suicides. Attitudes toward suicide changed radically after the establishment of the Catholic Church and the leadership of St. Augustine in the 4th century. Prior to that time, however, Christian martyrdom was a common and accepted form of political protest and spiritual salvation. Many early saints achieved recognition primarily through suicidal self-sacrifice, some believing they were modeling their death after Christ's, who willingly accepted the crucifixion. St. Augustine, however, laid down rules against suicide that became the basis for Christian doctrine throughout the succeeding centuries. Augustine, drawing heavily from the philosophy of Plato and Aristotle, argued against suicide since it violated the 6th commandment, thou shalt not kill, and allowed no opportunity for repentance. I'm going to jump a little bit. So this is the beginning of his book, and I'm jumping a little bit into it. Societal opposition and defamation of suicide in Christian communities continued and gathered strength throughout the Middle Ages until the Renaissance, and especially the Age of Enlightenment, broadened thinking on the subject. Today, public and private opinion remains far from unanimous, but the stigma originating in early times remains. This is interesting, I think. It is a stigma, however, which is not and has never been absolute or well-defined. While acknowledging the relatively low lethality behavior, it is essential not to dismiss it. Teenage suicide does appear to occur within an interpersonal context and may contain efforts at attention-seeking manipulation. However, rather than angry, consciously and purposefully coercive qualities so often attributed to them, the teenage suicide attempter seems to be expressing more inner directed anger and a desperate and confused need to elicit caring from either specific individuals or from the environment to call in some more stabilizing force to take control of their chaotic world. As such, it is often a communicative gesture, though of dubious value effectiveness. So just one last quote actually from this guy it's really, I like the book even though it's old. I feel it has a lot of foresight in it. And this quote is from when he's discussing the reasons for the suicide attempt. So he says reasons such as seek help and attention, and certainly reasons such as influence others, make others feel frightened or sorry, seem shallow and somehow frivolous in that they lack a quality of depth and history. As such, they merely scratch the surface in explaining adolescent suicidal behavior. I really appreciate this guy. He still lives, I found out, even though I can't find a way to look up his chart. There's nothing public and I can't contact him. I found him on LinkedIn, I think, but I couldn't even send a message. So I would love to see this guy's chart because I feel, it's just so such good content actually in that book. But so what was the content here? At least we can say that with that little bit of history, we can say that it's not as simple as our perceived right and wrong about, in terms of how to handle a suicide attempter, it's not about how we subjectively interpret the actions, because we know that we as humans are prone to error, and we know that what is true at one level will not be true under other circumstances. So blame, of course, I'm really biased here. Blame from societal mechanisms, it seems not just inappropriate, but really counterproductive. Because in trying to understand the suicide attempter, we have to really respect the limitation of subjective perception, both the caregivers, but also, the attempters. And we know that the patient or the attempter in this position, they tried to commit suicide, it didn't work, they woke up. They can do little to protest their treatment, and that's why it's so vulnerable if this group is not given the best of care. But there's so much in this theme that I came to think of after having read his book. First of all, what is it I would be pushed and pulled towards trying to kill? What is it that I would kill? Myself? The image of who I take myself to be? I mean, that's the image who I take myself to be is constructed. And it's constructed by, for example, what I inherited from my past. We can talk prior lives, so we can just talk, genealogy. And also brain development. Being all of my attempts have been before 25. Also had my kids before 25. Anyway, so what is true too is that the self is changing over time. The self is fluid. So when I attempted suicide, when I planned, or when I even longed for dying, did I want to kill that self, that ever-evolving self? Or was it a part of me that I wanted to kill? I'm not answering this at the moment, just like thinking out loud. Because what is really at play, we have that philosophy of prior lives. So is it deliberate decisions in the moment of you committing suicide, trying to anyway? Is it deliberate? This is what I'm going to do? Or is it what you may think of deliberate decisions, but really bound up by preconditioned beliefs? So it's a big topic, because I'm both like thinking about what is the self anyway, and also what can make a person do this. And we know that our biases color anything we see. I mean, I took actions based on my beliefs and assumptions, and I believed it was me. But that's what I'm questioning, right? I'm critical about, was that me? I was raised in a religion, meaning when I was a child, and when you're a child, you can't distinguish between reality and fantasy, and this belief was reinforced by my primary caretakers and the religious community, both cornerstones in survival. It's your primary sources of love and food, and your primary group. We all have that tribal instinct. So, and of course the biblical stories I was told, and all of this Christian social order, we glorified death. And certainly in my household we did, because my father was struggling, and because my father was suicidal, so he did certainly too. It was never about me. It was never about my preferences. And being indoctrinated, and yeah, like I said, growing up in a household of manipulation and fear, I wonder if this suicidal longing really unconsciously was me wanting to express my view of this control, that I was actually going against that somehow. I don't know, maybe my understanding of death due to my father was just skewed. I'm not sure, but in a larger view, we make judgment that can go back to epigenetic influences. This is a quote I have from Jerry Pennon in his book on How to Survive. He even says that. And before we realize the deeper feelings that are underneath, and maybe have been there underneath in generations, then we are bound to certain and usually self-destructive patterns. And if because in the therapeutic work I do, we call them survival styles. So if it was really about surviving, well, then trying to kill yourself, that's really saying, I don't want to survive if this is the only way. So maybe it's actually a kind of an end. It's a rebellion against what you've learned, a rebellion against your preconditioned belief that has, it gets complicated, and I'm gonna have some more thoughts about it. So maybe I'll explain it in a more approachable way. But I hope you get the idea that it's not so simple. And I remember even at the time when I was young, I heard, that you would call it a cry for help. And even then I thought that was ridiculous. I would never do that. And for me, it has never been a cry for help, not consciously. But like he says in the book, we shouldn't dismiss it just because people may not have attempted suicide in a way where you could actually die from it. So if you look at that, oh, she couldn't even die from it, so what does she want? Is she manipulating us? That's not any way to help a person who's suffering, right? So even if it wasn't with death as the goal, I think it makes a lot of sense to really dive into what's going on here, and also to do it without becoming afraid of the whole fatality situation. I mean, it is terrifying, because if you lose someone you love, I understand that, but when you're in the role of helping someone, it's super important. I have felt as a patient, I've not been a patient that many times, but yeah, I guess, I mean, I've been a client to many therapists, right, where I've taken this subject up, and when I've sensed into their fear around the topic, or their eagerness to wanting me to choose life instead of death, I kind of just had to I couldn't be so open with them, because then I felt I need to help the therapist now. I need to reassure her, and also make sure that she's not, calling the police and my kids are taken away from my home, and because it has real consequences if some doctor were to report this, right? So yeah, it's all of these things, and it's really, I think, a very emotional topic that should be handled as such. Okay, so there's another book that I want to quote. Now, there are many of these books, so this is kind of just what I had access to. It's called How to Help the Suicidal Person to Choose Life. The author is called Kathleen Stephanie. Kathleen says that a type of stressor that often lead to a suicide attempt is associated with adverse life experiences. But of course. And this decreases the capacity for resilience. Resilience is the ability to cope in positive ways to stress. Another type of stressor is tied to the experience of loss. It could be loss of control when you get a chronic illness, or you can lose a close one. So, and then she also talks about the additional negative emotional repercussions from judgment when people exhibit suicidal ideation. And this is, the problem I referred to just before. I'm going to quote her. This was more of a summary. But then I'm going to quote her from page 34. Stigma is defined as an association of disgrace, of public disapproval of something such as a behavior or condition. The term stigma also conveys a deep, shameful mark of fault related to being a member of a group that is devalued by societal norms. And then she goes on to say that stigma exists within the health professions, and that they actually perpetuate the stigma. Schneidman, I think it's pronounced. Sorry if it's not. I'm going to say Schneidman, because she refers to this author who was an author who wrote about this in 1993. So Schneidman has long asserted that the causes of suicidal ideation, or thoughts of wanting to end one's life, are complicated and non-linear. He stressed that suicidal thoughts can be related to a biochemical imbalance in the brain, as proposed by psychiatrists. As some psychologists believe, suicide ideation can also be triggered by rage toward oneself that is misdirected. Does that remind you of something? Does that remind you of the other author who was talking about the anger being directed at oneself. It reminds me of that, and I can truly relate to that. Okay. So, yeah, rage toward oneself that is misdirected. Suicidal thoughts may also be associated with psychosocial stressors or recent loss. However, in addition to the many aspects that may affect a person's inclination to want to end their life, what Sneidman's work emphasized was the fact that there is a key factor that must not be ignored when we are considering suicide prevention. That crucial component is the negative mindset of the suicidal person. Those who are suicidal often feel worthless, with emotional impoverishment and loss of self-esteem. Social isolation and feelings of loneliness and hopelessness are very prevalent. I can sign off on that too. I'm going to jump a little bit, but still talking about Sneidman here. So he referred to the desolate and several emotional and psychological pain that is experienced by a suicidal person as psych ache. Do you like that? I like it. Instead of headache, it's psych ache. I like it. Okay. Psychache, according to Sneidman, consists of the hurt, anguish, soreness, aching, psychological pain in the mind that the person finds intolerable. Even though depression or hopelessness are strong predictors of suicide, Sneidman also insisted that neither one of these experiences in isolation is able to either account for or predict suicide. As proposed by Sneidman, psychache is a necessary condition for suicide to happen. Other researchers have tested Sneidman's assertions and found similar results. For example, depression, hopelessness, and psychache are all statistical predictors of suicide ideation, suicide preparation, and suicide motivation. Psychache, however, is consistently the strongest indicator of suicidality, it says somewhere too. I'm jumping in the text here, I'm sorry. So this is a book and I've just taken out some bits and pieces. But let's take a little break from quoting actually, because when I was in therapy, I spoke about wanting to kill myself as the only solution. Now, I'm not claiming that I've been in hours and hours of therapy talking about suicide. I haven't, because like I just told you, I've actually been protecting the therapist a lot, but I have had a few very significant moments in therapy where I shared about this. And I remember just before it was healed, actually, that I called this impulse the only solution, because the therapist asked me to give that impulse a name, and I said it's called the only solution because it is the only solution. And that would be the mistake of it, would be to be identified with it, right? Which I was in dark periods. Now let's keep on reading here. Sneidman further explained that a person's psychache, or their perception of their emotional pain, is so unbearable for them that their desire to end that pain through imminent death is viewed by them as their only solution. Sneidman described the narrowing of thinking that is focused only on death as constriction of thought. In suicide, the diaphragm of the mind narrows and focuses on a single goal of escape to the exclusion of all else, parents, spouse, children, and so on. Okay, so I'm moving on to the next and the only, the last author that I want to quote around this theme. He's called C. Zhang from the University of Finance in New York, and the article, it's on the web, and it's called The Strain Theory of Suicide. So I'm going to read a few pieces of that. The strain theory of suicide posits that a suicide is usually preceded by some psychological strain. A strain is not simply a pressure or stress. People may frequently have the latter, but not necessarily the former in their daily lives. A pressure or stress in daily life is a single variable phenomenon, but strain develops with at least two pressures or two variables. similar to the formation of cognitive dissonance, but more serious and detrimental than cognitive dissonance, as strain pulls or pushes an individual in different directions so as to make them frustrated, upset, angry, or even to feel pain. Examples include two different cultural values, a discrepancy between one's aspirations and reality, a discrepancy between one's status and that of others, and lack of coping ability in a crisis. As cognitive dissonance, strain is a psychological frustration, or even suffering that one has to find a solution to reduce or to do away with. A very serious and strong strain may turn into a mental disorder. The extreme solution for an unresolved strain may be suicide. How do you like that? I really hope you understand when I'm reading in this amateur English accent, because this is so good. Because I mean, cognitive dissonance, if you've dealt with religious trauma, that comes up easily. I don't know why I didn't go into that actually, but so this is something. It's not only that cognitive dissonance with where it's like your behavior is not. It's not what you really want. It's not really your values. It's not really what you believe, but you kind of have to do it. And then maybe you somehow turn it into what's yours, but there is a dissonance there. And so he says this is different because it's more serious. It's more detrimental that you are pulled in opposite directions on the inside. So I really personally relate a lot to that. We're going to keep reading a little bit. It's this article. I think we're at page 4 here. Suicide is a personal way to solve problems. Although there are, of course, other socially desirable ways, it is an individual preference or a rational choice as put by Durkheim. Émile Durkheim, a French sociologist. He says, the term suicide is applied to all cases of death resulting directly or indirectly from a positive or negative act of the victim himself, which he knows will produce the result. Suicide is to kill oneself voluntarily and intentionally. Psychological strains that are painful and inescapable can force the individual to make a choice, as humans tend to maximize rewards and minimize costs. Actually, rewards and costs are both individually subjective. When the cost of living outweighs the reward of living, the person may consider suicide, which may not be comprehended by another individual. However, although most people with negative profits and punishments in daily life do not think of suicide, those who intentionally and willingly kill themselves may have had such a rational calculation and chosen to avoid further cost and punishment by finishing life. There is another calculation. On some very rare occasions, people kill themselves to benefit others or the community, which is also called altruistic suicide by Durkheim. When these people believe that others or the community as a whole will be better off without them, they miscalculate the worth of their lives and conclude that their death will be more valuable. This misperception, coupled with a tendency towards self-sacrifice, may then result in a suicide. This represents, and I want you to remember this because in a little bit I'm going to be talking about Mars in Pisces, so this is actually it. This represents a devastating variant of what otherwise is an adaptive tendency. Okay. That's not all Mars in Pisces, but I just thought of it because it can potentially adapt to its own annihilation. The situation is usually made up of two or more conflicting social facts, which continue to bother or threaten the individual psychologically or physically, and she tries to find a solution in order to resume psychological and physiological equilibrium. The word strain is used to indicate the psychological experience of a person facing and deciding on conflicting social facts. A strain is different from pressure or stress. He has said that, but things repeat in these books. which usually indicates a simple and unidirectional force. Some researchers use the term of strain in that simple and unidirectional sense. For example, Turling-Watt and Sharp studied gender and race differences in strain associated with suicidal behavior among adolescents, and Stark and Wasserman used the word strain to indicate economic stress, such as unemployment and economic loss. Here, strain is a psychological suffering and can be experienced when a person does not give up on one of the two conflicting elements. Do you see that? So there are two conflicting elements. For example, a person may experience great strain when he or she has high aspirations in life, but does not have the means to achieve the goal. Oh God. I feel so like this is personal. Okay. This psychological suffering forces an individual to make a rational choice. Strain precedes a suicidal thought, including impulsive suicide. In other words, suicide can be considered to be a consequence of strain in certain circumstances. Okay, so there are 4 sources of psychological strain that may cause suicidal ideation. Each of the 4 types of strain is derived from specific sources. A source of strain must consist of at least 2 conflicting social facts. If the 2 social facts are non-contradictory, there should be no strain. Now, I'm not going to read all of that because I am afraid you'll fall asleep, but I will read it in just the headlines here. Strain source 1, differential values. When 2 conflicting social values or beliefs are competing in an individual's daily life, the person experiences value strain. The 2 conflicting social facts are the 2 competing personal beliefs internalized in the person's value system. A cult member I had to underscore that. A cult member may experience strain if the mainstream culture and the cult religion are both considered important in the cult member's daily life. Other examples include second generation of immigrants who have to abide by the ethnic culture rules enforced in the family while simultaneously adapting to American culture with peers and school. Okay, so that's source 1. Now, strain source 2, reality versus aspiration. If there is a discrepancy between a person's aspiration or high goal and a non-ideal reality the person has to live with, the person experiences aspiration strain. The 2 conflicting social facts are one's splendid ideal or goal and the reality that may prevent one from achieving it. It was Merton who first used the strain concept to account for crimes in the United States. When an individual living in the United States expects to be very rich or at least moderately successful, but in reality the means to achieve the goals are not equally available to the person because of their social status or other reasons, they may tend towards criminal activity. So, yeah, there are many great ways to deal with it. Let's not do that. Okay, I'm moving on here. I don't know if you can recognize any of this, and I hope for you that you don't struggle with suicide ideation and never have. And most people that I've met have not ever struggled with it. So I hope it still has some relevance for you because then, you might have other negative ways of coping with this. And maybe you can recognize yourself. And yeah, okay. Strain source 3, relative deprivation. In the situation where a poor individual realizes other people of the same or similar background are much better off, the person experiences deprivation strain. The 2 conflicting social facts are one's own miserable life, yeah, tell me about it, and the perceived wealth of comparative others. A person living in absolute poverty, where there is no comparison with others, does not necessarily feel bad, miserable, or deprived. Suicide rates are generally low in underdeveloped countries. On the other hand, if the same poor person understands that other people like him or her live a better life, he or she may feel deprived and become upset about the situation. In an economically polarized society, where the rich and poor live geographically close to each other, we definitely do that here in Denmark, I think most of us. In an economically polarized society where the rich and poor live geographically close to each other, people are likely to feel this discrepancy. Okay, last source of strain. Deficient coping. Facing a life crisis, some individuals are less able than others to cope with it, and then they may experience coping strain. The two conflicting social facts are life crisis and the appropriate coping capability. Not all people who have experienced crisis experience strain. A crisis may be only a pressure, a stress in daily life, and those individuals who are not able to cope with the crisis have strain. Some crises, as loss of money, loss of status, loss of face, divorce, death of a loved one, and so on, may lead to serious strain in the person who does not know how to cope with the negative life events. That is actually Mars and Pisces right there for you. The not knowing how to cope in the beginning, because it's, we develop. Okay, so those are the 4 sources of strain. And the author concludes it's a long article. It's 11 pages. Maybe it's not that long, but there's a lot of information here anyway. He concludes by saying that he agrees with Dogen about that mental disorder or even insanity may not be a reason for suicide, that they have different causes, and the high correlation between suicide and mental disorder is a function of a third variable that he believes is psychological strain, which we have just heard about. And I like that a lot, because I think individualizing problems like that it's just not cool, you all. It's not cool. It's really not helpful to just be like, because I read that many books. I've read many books on this topic, and most are not very interesting. Now I just ordered one so I'm gonna be speaking about that in the first part next time, I hope. But what they repeated, all of them, was around how much suicidal behavior relates to mental disorders, and that's fine. I can see that, but I like to post it like they just did here in the article around there's some psychological strain, and so it's a better explanation. I think it's more nuanced than it's just you who has this brain chemical thing, because that first author also said that, so sure, that's a possibility, but what about looking at other factors, which he was also very open to. Okay, so I think we should look at some astrology, and I did promise some good night reading with the last 3 sexualized sign, if you remember, from Jeffrey Wolfsgreen, but that has to wait at least until next time, until I find the book, because I lost the book. I mean, somewhere here in this one room where I spent at least all of my reading hours is here in this room, and it's just gone. And I also now only have one key that I'm really desperately holding on to, because I lost my extra key. So yeah, this is, it's a Piscean thing. Okay, so I thought that the astrological piece today should be something that symbolizes suicide, and it is what I just mentioned, Mars in Pisces. Now, that is a planet in a sign, right? And that is an archetype, but the same archetype can be found in the chart in different ways. Okay, so the same archetype here it's also, if you have, let's say you have Mars in Libra, but then it's in the 12th house, so it actually also relates to that potentially. It all depends on how the whole chart plays together. Okay, so I'm talking about an archetype, and it doesn't mean that if you have Mars in the 12th, then you are exactly like this. Not at all, but just some of the tendencies maybe of one part of you. And so it's Aries in the 12th house, Pisces in the 1st house, Neptune in aspect to Mars. All of this is actually a part of this archetype. For me, it's Mars in square to my sun, and that's actually not. But because my sun is in Pisces, because if you have Mars square to either Pisces or Neptune, then that is also this. I hope it's not too technical. You are welcome to ask questions, and maybe I can slow things down for a while, and you can understand better, and maybe you know all of what I'm talking about. I don't know. I'm still looking forward to hearing from one of you who would like to engage in what it is I'm doing here. Okay, Mars. There is this thing about Mars that it can be something that you attract in others, actually. So it'll be fun to see maybe if you recognize this and your partner is exactly like that. But the reason why we attract it in others is so we can rectify it in ourselves and make those necessary changes. So Mars is all about life force. So if anything is life affirming, it's this part of you. It's your Mars. Your Mars is what you fight for. It's what you live for. It's your core energy. It's where you know what you want and you are ready to defend yourself for it. You're ready to defend this thing that Mars represents in your chart anyway. And Mars knows that if I don't do this, nobody is going to do it. So there's this really autonomy and independence and strength. Pisces, because we're merging these two symbols right now, Pisces is not physical, it's pure, it's the raw material, it's a sign of getting along with everybody, unconditional love. It represents the womb, oneness, the universe, the masses, that which unifies all of us. Okay, so these two archetypes. The first challenge becomes, when you have this, to accept your own birth. So this type would be resisting incarnation and resenting life at first, because being in the womb, not having been birthed yet, it's just less distressing. And all this practical material life out here, this type will feel awkward about that in the beginning. So when we merge the Pisces, where there's no control, and Mars, where that's the warrior, then you could either shoot randomly in many different directions, and you could also deny the life force. Still talking about the beginning. This is not defining people who have this in their chart. Okay, it's just like a beginning where we all come with something that needs to be developed, right? So what will happen in the beginning is that the Mars and Pisces person will not touch the problem. It will rather numb out than confront anything. And it could be numbing out by alcohol. And you might also totally avoid life by suicide. It's sort of the Peter Pan complex of not wanting to grow up, not wanting to engage in all the real things. And it's not necessarily that they don't want to, but maybe it's more that they don't feel like they can. It's awkward, and they don't have that natural animalistic instinct. And the huge difference from being out here in the real world rather in Pisces. So okay, a way to see it is that Mars is the birth, right? And so Mars in Pisces is like birthing itself, but really remembering everything around Pisces. And it does need to come to terms with Pisces in some sense, but it needs to not be held back. That's why it's such an interesting archetype when you both have the oneness and then you also have the autonomy. So talking about struggling two different forces here, two different internal forces, that is. So it's not social facts as much, I guess. But okay. So the huge difference is that out here in the physical realm, we have boundaries, and you can't share everything with everyone, and that's what the Pisces wants, and that's why Mars in Pisces in the beginning can be promiscuous and lack discrimination, and it is also the symbol for prostitution. Yeah, it's good for many things. So why? It's because of this openness of Pisces, and it's not being trained in how to be safe, not being used to protect yourself. And in the beginning, it's like this type still lives in the womb, and it's those rules before the physical rules that apply. So that's why it does also simple this confusion around sexuality. It could be wounds after sexual abuse, which brings a hot cold relationship with sex. And okay, let me just sum up, because there are many outcomes to actually the same essence here. So it's around difficulty with incarnating. So the natural defense mechanism is to stay in the wound, actually, because it's too painful to get out there. But you go through these phases and you learn to defend yourself, and you learn to develop your immunity, and you become more engaged in this world, and you step out of innocence. And if you don't, I mean, then you're just never going to be equipped to face the challenges or meet the intensity of the material dimension, because you don't fight to survive. And that's the suicide, right? That's I recognize a lot. Okay, so there's also this side to this, because Mars is also about anger. So Mars in Pisces is actually angry with life, with even having to be here, and that they have to be here alone, because the Pisces, they were used to, if you say that they come from that womb dimension of always being helped. So that helplessness, that you can't do it on your own, is interrupted by the Aries autonomy. Mars in Pisces is the realization that we are forced to develop the ego, which means if you have an ego, then you have responsibility, and you can't only stay in the beauty, and you can't only be taken care of. So in the beginning, this can blend and come out as passive-aggressive tendency in a person, because the fight in you is just not confrontational. The fight is in the silence. The fight is you retrieve and you say, oh, it's fine. And maybe you don't even know yourself that something is really not fine, but they are really acting a no, even when they say yes. So it's hard to stand up for oneself in this archetype. They are more used to sacrificing and just not being in touch with the real issue. They just, turn the other cheek. That's very Mars and Pisces in the beginning, not the developed. It's the adaptation to dysfunction. And then comes this feeling that there's no way out, right? There's no way out. But there is a way out. There is a way out. Let's talk about that. The development of this archetype is to have protection. And at first, fear can actually protect you. This is a phase where you become afraid because you were taken advantage of. And then the fear will protect you in a way that, because now you cannot be naive and say yes. Fear will not let you be oblivious and trust too easily. So once the fear is there in the beginning as a protective mechanism, they can still come into a relationship in a very passive manner and feel trapped in that relationship, feel like they were dragged there because they're not really so great with expressing themselves maybe. And then yet they have that fear now, so they fear the commitment, and they have soul memories of having been trapped in prior lives, and maybe also from this life already having been trapped because they didn't know how to say no, and they were controlled in a prior relationship. So this creates the pattern of disappearing, which is also a Pisces thing, disappearing, slow ghosting, when it gets too much. And it can also be patterns of denial when it's too hard to look at. And this is really not about blame or stereotyping here, because the inner experience of this can be, I don't know what to do. I'm not stable, and I can't get out of this unstable, chaotic existence. So there is really an inside struggle, because the Mars in them is something quite different than what I've just said. The Mars wants to quit. The Mars wants to confront. The Mars wants to change. So this struggle will at first lead to fear, so that they are aware of dangers, So it's sort of the beginning of Mars as a defense mechanism. You can say that where Neptune, or Pisces, is in your chart, that's where you tend to be naive and expect things to happen on their own, and where you don't have protection in the beginning. And then in the next phase, that same place in your chart is where fear both serves you and limits you. It's a place where there is something here you could not control the circumstances, and you could not fix the problem, and you potentially became overwhelmed by it. And that's where you are at risk of giving up completely. And there, I mean, you don't have to commit suicide, but you can still have this tendency to limit exposure and to go hide until a later phase where you're more developed and you are ready to defy your fears. Because at that point, this type is going beyond the protective pattern, and they start listening to the call of the unknown, and they start. Actually, before that, you have to start to learn to cope and manage life, because, we can't stay closed and afraid of victimization for very long. So in this phase, you really start to develop your ego, so that you descend into the body and step out of neglecting yourself and your body and your physical existence, and you develop skills. So this is a Virgo thing, the opposite archetype, and you develop the ego to influence the collective, and then you can go beyond your fears by demystifying the danger of living, and so in that way you can become empowered. So Pisces is the spiritual, and Mars, you've heard probably that's the warrior, so the spiritual warrior, and that can have that feel to it that you're actually quite lucky because you can achieve something without even trying. So that's an upside. But with Mars and Pisces, it's always this balance of fate and control, of action and accept. And you may compensate for some of this and borrow from the Virgo qualities to try and have some control in your life. So that's why, again, even though you have this in your chart and you're like, I'm not like this, I'm always on time, that may be a compensation. Not that there's anything wrong with it, not that there's anything great with it, it's just a thing. So, but just to wrap it up here, what you need if you have this archetype is you need to embody, really embody, and to develop the life force as an individual consciousness, because the spiritual is that oneness. And sure, that's a thing further down the road, but for someone who comes in like this, the important thing is absolutely the individual consciousness to be separate, so that you don't end up as a blank slate and you have no control and you have no choice. There is that need for individual action. There is that need to come in and take action, and to actually to deal with what's really here, rather than spiritually dissociating, because that's so natural to you. But it's actually better for a type like this to wait off a little bit by that, and then really find the courage to face the situations in reality that you're in here, and so that you know and you learn to know when to let go, and also, of course, healing your wounds, because that's a Pisces thing about healing. And I wonder what someone has done to you in a prior lives with Mars there, right? So to heal your wounds and to get out of that coping mechanism where you just don't face them, just walk past them, spiritual dissociate from it, like, oh, it's all good, no problem, but it's really painful. So revisit the wounds, and from that confrontation, you are able to free yourself from it. Okay, that's all for now. I hope that it was life affirming for you to just talk about this, I think, very natural tendency to fantasize about an escape. Let me go to something where it's just much more easy than this. I guess every time you have this feeling you want to go on a holiday, that could even be on the scale of what we're talking about here. If you made a spectrum, holiday was in one end, and then committing suicide is in another end. But I have to develop that theory. I'm just thinking out loud right now. And I'll stop doing that. And you need your peace. And I'm just wishing you the best of days wherever you are. geographically and wherever you are in your life, whatever has made you listen to me, could maybe find a place to call whole in this company and in this community of people who dare to say these things, who dare to talk about these things. So I think that is a place to call whole. That is a place to find whole, when you're free to say how it was. How was it? It's actually the opposite of, because Mars in Pisces, that's what you have to develop. So Mars in Pisces, in the beginning, you don't confront anything and you just walk past it, and that's the suicide dimension. And then so the opposite of suicide is actually, it's the life force, and it's the expression, and it's you're here and you're allowed to be here in the way that you're here, and we want you to be here just as you are. That's it. Talk soon.